A face like a quiet spell, pale blue eyes, a stillness that could silence a studio. In the mid-1990s, when fashion was torn between excess and restraint, one image tipped the balance. Vogue Italia placed her on its cover, and minimalism suddenly had a muse with a name as medieval as a myth, Guinevere van Seenus. Campaigns distilled around her calm. Editors learned that a whisper could carry farther than a shout. Years later, she would turn the lens around, crafting her own dreamlike pictures, less an exit than a metamorphosis. But how did a teenager from the American coasts become the emblem of cool austerity? And why did she choose distance when the world was leaning closer? Before she became fashion's quiet oracle, Guinevere van Seenus was a dream, half a world away from the camera's flash. Born in the coastal calm of the United States to a Dutch father and an American mother, her world was defined by simplicity, ocean light, tall grass, and silence. She wasn't a child who demanded attention. She watched. She absorbed. And that quiet watchfulness would one day become her greatest power. Her name, Guinevere, already carried the weight of legend, the queen who loved a knight more than a king, the woman torn between duty and desire. It felt prophetic, even before she knew it. By her teenage years, her family had moved frequently. She was neither fully Dutch nor wholly American. She was something in between, an outsider everywhere, at home, nowhere. At 16, that in-between quality caught someone's eye. A scout from elite model management saw her in a Florida mall, drawn not by beauty in the conventional sense, but by an otherworldly stillness. Guinevere wasn't trying to be seen, yet no one could look away. The camera loved her contradiction, soft yet remote, fragile yet defiant. Her early test shots revealed something uncanny. She didn't pose, she existed. Photographers described it as presence without performance, while other aspiring models tilted their heads, smiled, or struck angles. Guinevere simply looked, and the image came alive. Her first trips to New York were disorienting. The noise, the speed, the obsession with perfection, all foreign to someone who grew up surrounded by water and silence. But she adapted not by changing herself, but by staying still as the chaos spun around her. That stillness made her unforgettable. Within months, she was on runways for Jill Sander and Helmut Lang, designers who didn't want glamour, but truth. They saw in her a face that spoke without expression, a canvas on which light itself became emotion. The transformation had begun. From the quiet girl near the sea to the muse who would redefine beauty for an entire generation. By the mid-1990s, Guinevere van Seenus had become more than a model. She was an atmosphere. In an era obsessed with noise, sparkle, and supermodel charisma, her silence was magnetic. Photographers like Steven Meisel, Peter Lindbergh, and Craig McDean didn't simply shoot her. They built entire stories around her stillness. She was the anti-Naomi, the opposite of glamour. No glossy smiles, no commercial glow. Just raw, timeless emotion. In front of Meisel's lens, her face became language, one that spoke of solitude, intellect, and something just out of reach. When Vogue Italia published those moody portraits, readers paused. They didn't know exactly what they were looking at, only that it felt real. Guinevere walked for Jill Sander, Helmut Lang, and Yohji Yamamoto, designers who celebrated restraint in structure, not spectacle. Her walk was deliberate, her eyes distant, her body language more sculpture than show. She was not there to please, she was there to exist. And that defiance, subtle yet undeniable, made her unforgettable. By 1996, she was everywhere, from Calvin Klein campaigns to avant-garde editorials that defined intellectual fashion. Yet fame never seemed to cling to her. While other models courted celebrity, Guinevere drifted above it all, as if belonging to another realm entirely. Her beauty had no nationality, no era. It was pure, and that purity made her the perfect vessel for a new aesthetic: minimalism. Still, behind the lens, she often retreated into quiet. Long days under hot lights, stylists whispering, the camera clicking endlessly. It drained her. But she carried herself with the same composure, her eyes steady, her gestures precise. Every photograph felt like a diary entry she never wrote. Her rise wasn't loud, but it was absolute. In a world that prized performance, Guinevere proved that stillness could be the most powerful form of expression. She didn't just model fashion, she transformed it into poetry. At the height of her success, Guinevere van Seenus began to fade, not from memory, but from visibility. The same silence that had once made her a mystery now became a barrier between her and the world she helped define. Fashion was changing. The millennium was approaching, bringing with it the fever of celebrity culture, reality television, and louder, flashier icons. Guinevere didn't fit the new rhythm. She didn't chase attention or share herself in fragments. She resisted transformation into a brand. And in an industry that worships reinvention, resistance can look like disappearance. The endless cycles of travel, fittings, and the constant demand for perfection began to weigh on her. She had always been introspective, sensitive to energy, and now every studio light felt harsher, every camera flash too invasive. There were whispers: she's difficult, distant, unpredictable. But what they called distance was really exhaustion. What they called mystery was a quiet plea for space. By the early 2000s, Guinevere stepped back almost completely. She turned down campaigns that would have paid fortunes, choosing instead to be at home, to breathe, to exist without lenses. No scandal, no headlines, just a slow, deliberate retreat. For an industry addicted to spectacle, her silence was its own kind of rebellion. Editors speculated. Some said she had vanished. Others claimed she was reinventing herself as a photographer. The truth was simpler and far more human. She had given so much of herself to imagery that she needed to rediscover who she was beyond it. The years away were not an ending. They were a return. While the fashion world speculated about her absence, Guinevere van Seenus was quietly reconstructing herself, not as a model, but as an observer. She had spent so long being seen that she wanted, finally, to see. She studied photography. She wandered through cities without makeup, camera in hand, chasing light instead of attention. Her self-portraits were haunting. Soft focus, muted colors, emotion suspended somewhere between presence and disappearance. It was as if she was reintroducing herself to the world, one frame at a time. Guinevere once said in an interview, "I'm drawn to the spaces between things, between people, between words, between what's said and what's meant." That sentiment defined her second act. No longer the silent muse, she became the storyteller, exploring the fragility and intimacy that had always been part of her image. Only now they were hers to interpret. Occasionally, she reappeared in editorials, not as a comeback, but as a continuation. Her beauty had matured, more angular, wiser, almost spectral. She was no longer the girl on the cover, but the woman behind the camera, shaping how beauty could feel instead of how it should look. In a world obsessed with return and reinvention, Guinevere's redemption was quiet. No grand campaigns, no tearful confessions, no spotlighted comeback. Her healing came from creating rather than performing, from being present rather than being perfect. Through her lens, she finally captured what she had been searching for all along: peace. Time has a way of erasing faces in fashion, but not hers. Guinevere van Seenus remains not as a trend, but as a tone. Her legacy is not measured in campaigns or covers, but in atmosphere. Every generation has its muses. Few become metaphors. Photographers still speak of her in reverent tones. Stephen Meisel once described her as a mood you couldn't fake. Younger models study her expressions, the stillness, the restraint, the refusal to overperform. She gave them permission to do less, and in doing so, to mean more. Her influence lingers in today's shift toward authenticity and quiet luxury. Aesthetics built on understatement, emotional honesty, and the courage to disappear when necessary. Designers like The Row and Phoebe Philo's Celine owe part of their visual language to the serenity Guinevere embodied 3 decades ago. Even now, when she rarely grants interviews or public appearances, her presence feels eternal. The grain of her photographs, the calm of her gaze, the way she turned distance into intimacy, these remain cornerstones of modern fashion imagery. Guinevere's story reminds us that silence can echo louder than applause, and that disappearance sometimes is its own kind of immortality. She didn't need to conquer the world to change it. She simply stood still, and the world moved around her.